I think they were due yesterday.
Okay, good evening. This is the Huntley Community School District 158 Committee of the Whole meeting for November 4th. It is 6:01. Can we have roll call, please?
Mr. Crary.
Here.
Mr. Guerin.
Here.
Mr. Gentry.
Here.
Mr. Quagliano.
Here.
Mrs. Melendi.
Here.
Mrs. Maiorino. Here. Mr. Troy.
All right. Dr. Rowe has a few words to say before we do the pledge.
We have had a very, very difficult couple of weeks in Huntley 158, primarily at our high school. And we've lost a couple of really great people who have made a major mark on who our high school is, the culture, and who it was back before it was the modern Huntley High School of today. Sharon Hartman was assistant principal at Huntley High School from 1999 to 2012, passed away on Tuesday. She was battling cancer, and we're very heartbroken for her passing. And then currently, Jennifer Hoyk, a 25-year veteran and an active administrator at the high school, department chair of our PE department, passed away a week prior to Ms. Hartman's passing, also of cancer. Mrs. Hoyk, I'll spend a few minutes. I mean, honestly, we are heartbroken at the loss of Sharon. Sharon retired the year I was headed to the high school. She and Mr. Johnson retired the same year, so it was the spring of 13. She was beloved in that building. And she was a very tough lady, but she would run through a wall for kids, which is what gained her the respect of everyone in that building. Jennifer Hoyt was in her 25th year as a Huntley 158 employee. And the stories go that Mike Flattery, who was just a couple of years beyond and more veteran than she, hired her as the second PE teacher at Huntley High School before our current high school was where they resided. She's since built a department as the department chair of 20 PE teachers, given the size and the growth of our school. And honestly, I can say without reservation, she's one of the most effective administrators that I've ever worked with. She just got things done. She built a family in her department. She was very tough, but extremely fair. And she loved her colleagues, and they were beloved by them because of that. And she's just left a huge hole in our hearts as 150 employees and people that work for her at the high school. So if you'll join me, I would really appreciate joining me in a moment of silence for both of those liberators that have gone on. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rowe. Pledge of Allegiance. We can bring the crew in.
Warmed up out there. All right. Is it okay if they say their name for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. We have some friends from our early childhood center. Are you guys here now?
My name is Kate. My name is Quinn. My name is Brown. My name is Riley. My name is Anya.
Good job, friends. We tell everyone to stand up and put their hand on their heart. Face the flag. Are you ready? Ready? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and Got lots of small ones. Everybody smile. Ready? Awesome job.
Thank you very much, parents, for bringing them up. It doesn't get any easier than that. Pretty awesome.
I love
That's great. Okay, and item 3, public comment. Do we have any? I don't have anything here. Nothing? Okay. Move on to item 4, revision and adoption of the agenda. Okay, anybody have any questions? I'll make a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Can we have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Melendy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Our agenda. Go to item 5, curriculum and instruction. Mr. Guerin.
Thank you very much. 5.1 is the Huntley High School course proposal for 21-22. Dr. Schlichter.
Thank you very much. So this is our annual time of the year when we look at our new courses for the high school. And as you know, over the years, we've really kind of tried to target those to some really more specific areas of focus. And what you'll see before you is for your approval, 2 courses only that are being proposed for next year. Both of them are directly related to our dual degree program that we are going to be putting in place for the following year. We are looking at dual credit low impact fitness, and that will be dual credit with MCC, as well as dual credit introductory chemistry, dual credit with MCC. So our teachers have been working on these proposals, as well as working with MCC, looking at their syllabi, and we would be putting these in place with the approval of the high school administration, the curriculum department, and then bringing them to you for your approval. The materials and any training or anything like that would be placed into the budget and would be accounted for. So with that, I will take any questions.
Anybody from the committee have any questions?
Just a quick one, like what, as far as these two, I mean, I think they're both great ideas and, you know, part of the dual credit program, but why these two as opposed to any others?
That's actually a great question. I'm glad you asked, because you'll probably be seeing in the future others that appear before you and you think, why that one? With dual credit, as it has been from the beginning, we are adding classes as quickly as we can, and it's based on what classes we have the staff to teach. So the staff has to have a specific type of credential. In some cases, it's a master's in the subject area. In some cases, it's 18 credits in the subject area beyond their bachelor's. But essentially, as soon as we get a teacher that is certified or gets those credits to teach it, we look to add that class. So we've been working with MCC on who those folks are, and we now have teachers that can teach these classes. So, so they're before you.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
So my question would be, what, are freshmen eligible to do this, or is this like a junior, senior eligibility? Who's eligible to take these?
Yeah, depending on the class, it would be generally sophomores, juniors, and seniors, and more typically juniors and seniors, in terms of filling those classes.
Okay. All right.
In any dual credit class.
Right. So what, piggybacking off of Mr. Gentry's question, so what can we expect on the horizon, say like the next 3 to 5 types of classes? What's coming up on the horizon?
So right now, we don't have any further staff members that as of this moment have the ability that we say, oh, we're proposing this next. But what I will tell you is that MCC proposed and got awarded a very large grant where they are able to work with school districts to cover the cost of some of the teachers in our schools getting that certification. And we did have a large number of teachers indicate willingness to do so. And so we will be looking at trying to add core classes, trying to potentially add some electives. For us with the dual degree program, it's an added benefit would be that they wouldn't have to go to MCC to take a core class. So the more that we can add, say, for example, if we could add Spanish or, something like that, that's a high incidence class, we would love to do that. So those types of classes we would really focus on. But again, it also just depends on having those teachers.
But in terms of what can be expected with living within the pathway of the dual degree program, is if you're going to make a prediction, those are the courses you should expect to see come forward. If they're being taught by an MCC professor at MCC, we have the ability to transition those back into our high school and our teachers get that credential. So that would be the course that we would then propose to bring into our course book, is what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And so when we look at that dual degree, we're looking at the Associate of Arts degree. And there's, as you know, like in any college, there's multiple classes you can take that might fulfill a certain requirement to get a degree. But for us, if we say, for example, I'll just use the example, if we can offer a history class internally, that's one class they don't have to go to MCC for. So we would be focusing on trying to assist with those courses that ultimately would allow kids to either attain part of that degree that they wouldn't have to go to MCC for, or potentially offer them more choice, because students that do opt into that dual degree program, they will, to a certain degree, be following a pathway of classes that we have dual credit for, and so the more dual credit classes we can add, the more they'll have a little bit of choice within that pathway, if that makes sense.
So I had a quick question, because I was looking at chemistry, and it says textbook or online material, and then there's a note that says pending information for MCC. So this question kind of came up in my mind, like, if we're talking about professors at MCC, is there, because there's other schools that are also part of this program, correct, to get your associate's degree while you're in high school. Is there an opportunity for online where the professor could teach to multiple students in different high schools, or could it be online material?
So I think it's kind of two separate questions. So much of the material, just like our material internally, some of it is online, some of it might be in the cloud, some of it might be purchased licenses, and some of it might be actual textbooks. What I will tell you as well is there are a few other high schools in the region that do have a dual degree program, or they're developing one. And there is a potential for us to partner with them on the course offerings, but those are kind of two separate questions. And so if an MCC professor is teaching the class, it could be a remote class or it could be an in-person class, because they do offer both at MCC, and we would work with them on that distinction for what's best for our kids.
Thank you. Yeah, it was two questions, because I kind of merged it into
I
one.
sort of heard that in between,
yeah. Because my brain just kind of, jumped ahead of me, so.
Yeah, no, but I think both good questions, yeah.
All right, any other questions or comments? And if not, I would recommend we move that forward to the board meeting coming up. And if that's okay, then we'll move to 5.2, the Illinois School Report Card Update. Dr. Schlichter and Dr. McCrindle.
Thank you very much. Dr. McCrindle and I are here today to provide you an update on the first release of the school report card, which is being released in 3 installments this year during the course of the school year, which is very unusual. I'm going to be sharing my screen in just a moment here, and we will walk through kind of an update on what we are seeing this year, as well as what we can expect into the future. I'm sharing, but it's not up on the screen. Here it is. Just a little bit, yes. So the purpose of our presentation today is to provide an overview of the release process just to really reemphasize, it is extremely different this year than what it has been before, and that is due completely to the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and specifically the impact it had on the state in their ability to do testing in a timely fashion and when the scores came in. So essentially, there's a little bit of a shifted timeline in terms of the metrics that we're used to seeing. So we're going to provide that overview. We are going to report information from the initial report card release, and that is the report card release that went live here at the beginning of November, or actually the very last day of October. And so the areas that we'll be reporting on are student mobility rate, chronic absenteeism, graduation rate, and teacher retention. So essentially, in this first release of the report card, the state did not publicly release or report on any student academic achievement data because they simply don't have it finalized yet. Some of the districts were still taking those assessments all the way into this fall. We also will be showing some example data by demographics for student groups. And that's something, again, that's a little different, and that's a choice we made, because we know that we want to look at all students, and we know it's not always enough to just say, this is the overall graduation rate. As we move forward focusing on the needs of all students and inclusivity, we want to make sure that we're focusing on the different groups and how different pieces, especially the pandemic, but also just their own experience has impacted them, as well as we're going to share some next steps for reporting this school year. So like I said, this is a very unique year. Our typical data sources are either not available at all or they will be delayed. And so when the state, there was a little bit of media attention, and the state did give some overall overviews of data. That was really just from the districts that took the tests in the spring. So the state is very clearly saying, not only did the pandemic impact who took the test, the participation rate wasn't the same, but in addition, not all the districts took it at the same time. And so those data sources are either different, they are sometimes presented, but presented without a high degree of certainty by the state, or they're just missing. We do know that student progress during the pandemic was just different for different students and groups. We've heard from different families saying, my child did great during this time. We know that on the aggregate, overall, there were situations in which students in some of those learning areas, as well as social emotional learning, did have some unfinished learning. They didn't necessarily end last year where we would have expected in all areas for students to end, and that's nationwide. And so we do know that that's part of this unique year, and it's going to reflect in several of the metrics in addition to student learning. We do know that the focus on data and progress from different student groups in order to identify where the greatest areas of need for support are. So for us, it's not just about looking at the big picture, it's about looking at the specifics. And we also feel that it's important, even more so at this time, to really dig in and take the opportunity to commit to all students' progress. So if we have an opportunity to look at any data that's broken down by student groups, say, for example, our students on free and reduced lunch, our students with IEPs, we're going to take that opportunity to do it and to just be very clear about what these students need and what we need to do to move forward.
So as Dr. Switzer shared, there will be the report cards coming out in 3 different releases. So the first initial release, which just came out October 29th, does include metrics that don't rely on assessment data at the school district and state level. So we'll be reporting those this evening. The second release is coming out on December 2nd, and this will be preliminary data for the IAR, SAT, all of the college and career readiness data, and that'll be at the school and the district level, not the state level, because they're just reporting on the data for the districts who took the assessments in the spring and not the fall yet. So the final and third release is not until April 27th of 2022, and that's where the finalized data for all of our normal assessments, which includes access, DLM, and the other data I described before, will be available at the school, district, and the state level. So just a couple of key changes we want to highlight. This year, the following metrics will not be reported. The Illinois Science Assessment data is not going to be provided. The IAR growth percentile data will not be provided. It's just going to be providing how students did in regards to achievement on IAR, because the state is really taking a look at this data and saying that we cannot compare last year's data to any prior year's data because it was such a different year. They are also not presenting or including the early learning, which is our kids assessment data. And then the summative designation was waived this year as well, so we will not be receiving an updated summative designation. The last point I just want to highlight is that all of the assessment data will not be showing any charts comparing data to prior years, like I shared before, because there's just so many things that happen that you can't compare to prior year based off the pandemic. And so just that's one way the state is looking at this data. And this last slide is just showing you that the state has say that the data is compromised due to the pandemic. And so most of the data that we're reporting has one of 5 flags on it, because the state is saying as well that the metrics were calculated with concerns based off the pandemic. And so while we're reporting and sharing this data, we just want to make sure that we all understand that there is a context around it, which helps explain where we are and how we should interpret and use it.
So I think if we think about sort of the larger context of and it's just a few data points we're going to look at today, I think a way to think about and understand the larger context is really to think about the landscape that our students were in and how it impacted them in some of their areas that are sort of adjacent to their academic performance. So things like attendance, things like how they moved around the district or moved between districts. Our students' lives really did have an impact from this pandemic. And so this first release of data that we're going to be presenting sort of deals with that larger context for their learning. So this first is student mobility rate. And you can see that this is calculated. We put their little warning at the top. They just stated that there is a possible impact due to COVID-19. They don't say what that impact is, but what that means for us whenever we see that is that we just need to understand that there may be some things in the data set that we look at and say that looks very strange or that looks really different from the last year. And in that case, we just need to understand that it's because of that reason. So a school's mobility rate is a percentage of students who experienced at least one transfer in or out of the school between the first day of October and the last school day. So this is between schools, not necessarily in and out of districts. Our district and all of our schools' mobility rates do tend to be on the very low side for the state, and they still are. And so when we look at our students, our families tend to be pretty stable. We tend to have our families in their homes and staying in the same school, and we work really hard with them to continue with our students learning, even if they do have a little bit of upheaval in their lives that requires some moves. And so this data was disaggregated by the state, and it was separated into some of our demographic groups. So that very first set of columns is all students. The light green is the district, the dark green is the state. And so like I said, in most cases, we are having a lower mobility rate than across the state. And that's a good thing. That means our students are experiencing more stability. So for all of our students, the mobility rate was 4%. And if you look across, we do have some demographic groups where that climbed significantly. In particular, Black students and English learners, we see that there is a little bit of a higher mobility rate, indicating for us that those students experienced a little bit more upheaval, as well as needing some additional support. So there, we do have the ability internally to drill down and to see who those students are and what might they need and what schools they're from. This is really more of just that overview for the district level. And the second data point is not the same as student mobility, but it really also applies to that larger context, and that's chronic absenteeism. So the state actually has a very specific definition. I think we all know what the word chronic means. It means something that happens often, and being absent is being absent. But what the state means by that is the percentage of students who miss 10% or more of school days per year, either with or without a valid excuse. So we may have students that have a valid excuse, but it's an excused absence, but nevertheless it was missed. And so it's really a measure of sort of missed learning days. And when we look at this, there's something to explain, which I think is when it says, again, possible impact due to COVID. Some folks have looked at this and said, that looks really strange that last year, with that year we had, right, with the remote and in-person and hybrid across the state, why is that having a lower absentee rate, not a higher absentee rate? And that's a perfect example of what Dr. McCrindle was saying, which is the data has a hard time being compared. Last year, the state actually changed the definition of absenteeism because it was so difficult to account for attendance. It was so difficult to say across the state, if a student has a camera on, does that mean they're absent or present? Do they have to tune in? What if they tune in halfway through a class? You know, all those types of pieces. So the state took a very lenient definition of attendance last year, and you can see where that is reflected by a lower chronic absentee rate. You can see that this past year in 2021, we do see that it's a higher chronic absentee rate, and again, that is across the state as well as in the district. We are, again, slightly lower than the state. We're at 18%, and the state is at 21%. But we definitely see that across all of our comparative districts, across districts that we collaborate with. It's just that students during the past year had a very difficult time, in some cases due to the pandemic, in some cases due to family issues, that attendance may have come and gone just a little bit, or students may have struggled in different ways. And we do see that coming forward in the absentee rate.
Just a quick question to clarify, as far as like the, non-comparability of 2020, is it felt that the district, or the district versus the state are comparable within the same year?
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty likely that the district, so if we were to look at that and see it flip-flopped, where somehow we were way higher than the state, that would be huge cause for concern and very puzzling. So you can see it might be fairly uniform in terms of proportion. Right. That would make sense. So you see they're both somewhat down, and then they both go somewhat up.
Okay, thank you.
The next metric, and again, it's an academic metric, and it's a metric that we're tracking very closely. It's not dependent on assessment data, and so that's why we are able to report that right now. And this is our graduation rate. So as, again, it's stating potential possible data impacts for COVID-19. And it's a little bit of a different impact than the way that that's meant for the prior two slides. So this is showing the percentage of students graduating who entered 9th grade. And I do want to make that clear. So when we look at our graduation rate, if a student entered 9th grade and didn't graduate, but they moved away, and we can code them, we know they moved to Indiana, and we got the records request, we code them that way, that student's not a non-graduate. But a student that moves away, goes to homeschool, and the parent never communicates that with us and we're unable to track, that student might be a non-graduate. And so that's where we have really taken a strong focus on that individual approach from our counselors and from other folks at the high school to make sure that we are literally knowing these students' names. Who are these students? Where are they going? And how can we make sure that both our record keeping is very accurate, but also that we understand if a student is struggling, they don't just simply leave, that we have those supports for them. So something that it's a good thing. We do see that our graduation rate has slowly climbed. We are in the red and the state is in the blue. Again, you see a somewhat of a proportion there that makes sense. We are typically higher than the state. Something that I think is worthy of note is our graduation rate did continue to go up this past year while the state's declined. And so that is something that I think our high school has worked very, very hard on. One point I also want to make is that 1920, when the pandemic started, those last 3 months of the school year, where where we went out from the schools, the state shut down, the state actually made a lot of changes to graduation that year because they did it quickly. So they released some students from graduation requirements, they reduced graduation requirements, and they put in place, in some cases, pass, fail, pass, incomplete. They gave us some leeway on the final deadline for reporting. So actually, the year that we maybe would have expected to see the most upheaval potentially would have been that 1920 year, that 2020 graduation rate. If any graduation rate was going to be artificially inflated across the state, it potentially would have been that one, because the state lowered their graduation requirements a little bit in order to account for the emergency pandemic nature. This past year, that was not shifted. The state went right back to its full graduation requirements. We held the line on graduation requirements, and we did typical grading. Now we expect and need to see this continue to rise, and so this is something that we're going to be working very hard on at the high school and at the district level. We also look at this by our student groups, and so again, it's important to look at all students, but it's also important to look and see, are there any student groups that end up having more of a struggle with their graduation rate than others? And so when we look at these groups, we can, clearly see that in most cases, our district with that light green is still higher than the state level. In some cases, not so much. But we also do see that we do have some of our student groups that are graduating at a lower percentage than the all-student group. And so this definitely causes an area of focus for us, and areas of focus, for example, with our Hispanic students, our English learners, our students with IEPs, and definitely continuing to look at our low-income students, our homeless students, and how can we put in place those supports, make sure that those students that might be having some instability for different reasons or having some struggles with learning have the right support so that they can continue to move forward and can graduate successfully. Another metric that we thought was important to present, simply because there's many metrics in the report card that did come forward at this time, but we know that teachers are one of the biggest indicators of student success, and something that's important to us is to look and see, especially in this year of upheaval, as to whether our teaching staff experienced more mobility or teacher retention suffered at all. And what we do see is that our teacher retention rate did stay relatively stable. It also stayed relatively stable across the state, which again, I think is a win. It's a benefit for students. But despite the nature of this pandemic, our staff worked harder than ever. We know that it was a stressful year for everybody, but we did maintain a mostly stable teaching staff to be able to continue serving our students.
So this next slide gets into what we do as we look at the data and how we use it. And one thing we want to highlight is our school improvement process. And on the left side, you see that we do have our district strategic plan, which we're all very familiar with. And then each building has a school improvement plan, which the principals, along with the core team, which consists of teachers and teacher leaders, coaches, school psychologists, and other people on our core team, create goals that they can work on to help student improvement. And then those also relate to some of the PLC or data and individual team goals. So each of our buildings have been using some of our local assessment data to create their school improvement plans, and these goals focus on literacy, math, social emotional learning, equity, and or some school culture components. And then within each of those goals are action items, and those connect to the three foundational pillars that we've been focusing on this year, which are those rigorous academics, the social emotional learning, and that educational equity. We do follow that plan, do, study, act process to ensure that we are using that data and using that to drive our decisions, and then using data to say, do we meet our goals? And then the district and school level teams do meet throughout the year to adjust those and to share highlights and progress and growth and get feedback and to share those successes, and then to tweak the goals so that we can keep identifying our students' needs. So the next step for the Illinois report card release in our data presentations that we wanted to share with you was, because of the timeline we presented earlier, we would be wanting to come back in February to provide an update of our mid-year school report card. Our reason for February is we want to provide you some internal local data to show some of the growth our students are making. And our students take our STAR and Ames Love assessments in December and in January. And so we want to be able to provide that with some context, since the state data will not have any comparison to other districts at that point. We want you to see the growth that our kids are making right now by simply being in school with their teachers and getting back to our normal type of learning. And then in May we would then share the finalized data report, which will include all of our different assessments and be able to compare across districts as well as to our own district and school data. And then we would hope in June to provide an update to our end of year district progress so that we can highlight what we've done and really tried to target with our unfinished learning and our learning plans, to see the growth and success that our students and staff have made this year. At that point, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer.
Any questions from anyone? Comments, questions?
I have a question. Excuse me. So I'm gonna mix ground here a little bit. They're in the IASB resolutions recommendations that are coming for discussion later on. There is mention of a national test, nation's report card, and I was curious if you're familiar with the nation's report card by the NAEP as opposed to PARC testing or other testing mechanisms that we use, because there were some reading statistics that they presented through this resolution that I'm not familiar with, and I'm curious what kind of test that is, if that's something that we use, don't use, and how does that deal with some of the data that you're seeing?
Yeah, I can take it. I was looking over at our elementary principal team because they actually presented some of that data to our staff recently about literacy. But the NAEP is a national assessment. They take a pulse on where students are reading at different grade levels. So third, fourth grade is where they take that pulse and just determine across the nation, are our kids performing and at what level. Currently, the way that it is set up is not all schools' data feeds into that. Certain schools sometimes get selected to take it based off of, random sampling, and they might just say, I think over at Wiki, you guys have been chosen for different assessments to trial run, or to take those pieces. They also take some of the state data and pull that into the sample as like a representative from Illinois as well. But that is pretty much right now to the extent of which, since Illinois does use the IAR assessment as our summative rating.
And I'm sorry that steps a little bit outside the boundary of this presentation, but to me, it's just interesting, with some of the attendance numbers and some of the information about testing and what our students have learned during this pandemic. So thank you for indulging my cross-pollination of topics here a little bit.
No, that's fine. And I do want to share, when we shared our data, our own internal data compared to that NAEP data, it was very comparable across the nation. So to what the nation would have been with our internal one that we shared with our staff. So the trends that you're seeing there are representative here as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? No? All right, that was for informational purposes, so we will move on to 6, Finance Committee.
Okay, Finance Committee, our monthly, we have our payables, so we have our purchase orders, press checks, accounts payable, disbursements listed in the agenda. Is there any questions related to the listings in there from the committee? From the committee, from the rest of the board? Questions? Now we'll move this forward to the board for approval. Item 6.2, monthly fiscal updates. Now, Mr. Altmeyer.
Thank you very much. Within the fiscal update, there are a few things that I do want to note. Normally, by this time of year, we would have done the preliminary levy to give the board some insight as to what new construction is, what EAV is, and all of those good things in preparation for the levy hearing in December. Unfortunately, we didn't receive the preliminary EAV reports until just recently, so we're going to do that next week. But we do have those reports, and actually there's some really good news with the reports, because new construction, although it is a preliminary estimate, so we do have to keep that in mind, and we have seen sometimes large fluctuations in the past. Preliminary new construction came in at approximately $16.5 million, which is approximately an 18% increase over last year's $13.9 million increase in new construction. So we were expecting it to be about $12 million, came in at about 16.5. Again, it's preliminary, but that's good news. EAV looks up of approximately 4% with the new construction. Without the new construction, the change in EAV is approximately 3%. So, just a little tease for next week's, preliminary levy that we will go through. And we will also be asking you to approve, the levy hearing at next week's meeting as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Two other things in the fiscal memo that I do want to note. Senate Bill 508, the tax recapture, and the trailer bill of House Bill 4130. The trailer bill of 4130 appears to have not gone anywhere, so that actually right now is a good thing, and that Senate Bill 508 is an automatic bill, meaning that the language as written in the trailer bill of 4130 would have asked us and asked every taxing district to actually request and provide almost a separate levy for that tax levy recapture, amongst other things. And it would have required a little more work on our part, not that big of a deal, frankly, on our part, but a lot more work on the county's part. And I believe the county clerks and the treasurer's office came together with legislators, as well as a lot of other associations opposing that bill, just simply because at the county level, frankly, it could have created a lot of gridlock. So good news right now on Senate Bill 508, but there might be forthcoming legislation at the next legislative sessions in the spring. So stay tuned on that. And then lastly, on debt restructuring, we're continuing to look at a forward rate lock. Unfortunately, I think I noted that the feds, unfortunately, appear not to be moving forward with tax-exempt advance refunding, which is unfortunate because that would provide us some very good favorable rates moving forward and help us in our restructuring efforts. So we are looking to kind of put a pause on for about a month and a half, 2 months until after the holidays, and we're going to revisit this opportunity the first week of January and possibly under the parameters resolution with the team that we've already signed, move something forward. So we'll have more information for the board at the board meeting in January. So did want to let the board know that to expect something in January, and we'll be reviewing that the first week of January with the parameters resolution team, which is Tony, myself, and Mr. Gentry as well. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have on the fiscal memo.
So just quickly on the debt restructuring, it's, again, we has pretty much have given up on the legislation that they had thought might be able to get into the infrastructure bill on tax exempt advance refunding. So just so everybody knows that we're really not holding out any more hope on that. This is more about just waiting to see how rates are. We just think at the beginning of the year things are kind of slow, and it's might be a little easier to get some rate relief at that time.
Correct. And there's a little seasonality historically with rates, and they tend to be a little lower first, second week of January versus through the holiday season. So we're hoping that plays in our favor.
Yeah. Any questions for Mr. Altmeyer related to that fiscal update? Not any questions on the activity fund report? That's listed. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to 6.3 is the revenue and expenditures report. Mr. Altmeyer.
Thank you very much. In front of you, you have the first quarter ending September 2021 financial executive summary. We continue to trend with budget unfavorable on most line items. If you were to look at the face of the executive summary, you might see purchase services, at 37% of budget when you would expect 25. And I think we talked about that at the last meeting. That is very consistent with prior years because of the payments of workman's comp and property and liability premiums in excess of $1 million at the beginning of the year. So that is very consistent, nothing to worry about on that line item. Health insurance on page 2 had another favorable month, $588,000 in claims, very comparable to what we experienced in prior year during COVID. So let's knock on wood that our employees continue to remain very healthy and that our claims continue to remain very favorable. So that's good news for the month of September, and we'll continue to monitor health insurance. I do want to note that at the bottom of that page, we talk about enrollment in the overall health insurance plan of 1,734. You know, I like to call it 1,734 belly buttons because those are employees and dependents, and that's a decrease of 20 members since prior year. So that is something that we do watch and monitor, as that will have an impact overall on the overall plan. And with the new plan year approaching, we'll have a new number shortly within the next month and a half or so. So from a dashboard perspective, if you flip to page 3, you might see a lot of red, but you know, being the first quarter of the month, based on these simple averages of what you're seeing here on revenue and key expenditures, absolutely no concerns with the dashboard as we continue to trend as expected on those line items versus historical prior years, not just prior year, because we know prior year, well, I was going to steal that, you know, data might be impacted by COVID-19. Well, I could put that on every financial document I have, but I won't. So just so you know, we're trending historically in line with all of those line items. So other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have on the first quarter ended September 2021 executive summary.
Right, so our health insurance plan is a calendar year plan, is that correct?
Yeah, it starts, goes in effect January 1.
Right, so you aren't gonna know exactly enrollment-wise till late December. Well, when's their, when open enrollment?
Open enrollments right now, we're getting done with our, my report right now.
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump you.
We're in the first week of the second week of open enrollment, so we should have, numbers for all the plans. I can have that at the December board meeting.
Yeah.
We'll know, I mean, might have some people, new hires that jump on in January, but we'll have 99% of the numbers.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, because obviously premiums were pretty low increase for the year, so a little more. You're talking about your enrollment dropped a little, it might see it come back up.
Yeah. Yeah. But we like this. That's one of the data points we certainly look at.
Yeah. Okay, anyone have any questions concerning the data presented? Okay, if not, then we'll move on to item 7, HR. Mr. Gentry.
Okay, first item on is 7.1, human resource update. Dr. Zier, maybe have some data on enrollment.
In the middle of it, so we'll have that in December. Just give you an idea of what that'll look like, people coming on. So I'm working through our system right now, helping folks out with the open enrollment process. I'm also wrapped up a lot of our annual ISD reporting early this year, so we've got all that stuff done that's due in February. So ISD can do what they do with that information. Just a couple more highlights on here. ACA reporting, we work with the fiscal department to get that done for the year, so everyone can have their 1095-C come tax time. So, you know, those are the primary highlights. And just real quick on the wellness screening, our wellness screening on site wrapped up last week. Legee was our last building last Friday, and now we have a month where folks, if they missed the on-site wellness screening, they can go off-site. So in December, I'll also have those numbers for you also who participated in the wellness screening for this year. So looks like right now it's going to be higher than last year, but that'll depend on the folks that have the off-site scheduled, whether they go here in November or not. Those are our highlights.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone? All right, if not, then we'll move on to item number 8, operate O&M. Mr. Troy.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Immediately the O&M updates. Mr. Rinkosik, anything to highlight on O&M update, please?
We have a mandatory pre-bid meeting coming for the road fitting project. It's been postponed till Tuesday. hopefully middle of the month, we hope to bring the board bids in December. There is no solar project dashboard because, as I worked through with a partner, to try to sift through the comment data and merge it with the solar data to develop the analysis of with solar and without solar. My partner has done a deep dive analysis of the last 12 months of billing and discovered several issues. So we've notified ComEd again. I also found out from our CTS people that have an added value service they do with our control maintenance contract, who have been uploading to Energy Star, that because of ComEd's choice on how they report the mean meter readings, which are not really the meter readings, it's total of the account reading divided by the number of meters, that we cannot load the data into Energy Star anymore. And I told them that that is not going to set well with the school district, and I filed a complaint, formal complaint, to get action. I know Dr. Rowe has also reached out to ComEd, and so I've got several people to talk to. I have people in my team now putting together a detailed report on a month-by-month basis for the last 12 months, when my partner was walking me through in some sample months for the last year where demand nominations and kilowatt-hour nominations were not matching up. So we're going to be having some deep conversations with them. So I'm concerned that if I give you some kind of data, I'm not sure of its accuracy right now. You have to get through all that matter with comment. And you may have noticed service contract extension discussions continue. There's something more coming tonight. I opened discussion with another one that we'll bring to you in December, which should solidify our notable service contracts to try to get us in a place and manage the inflation that's upon us. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee or the board, please?
I don't have any questions, I just comment. We just, stay on top. Don't let them off the hook on this.
My account representative and I talked deeply for a long time today, and he's been trying. But there's some of their answers is just, or we don't do it that way, or like for the Energy Star and things.
Right.
The EPA, the U.S. EPA says talk to your utility, so we're pushing harder. I filed a complaint with the ICC.
Yeah.
So they're our advocate now as well. We'll continue.
There's a million choices. You're doing the right thing.
Yep, agreed. Thank you. All right, moving along, if there's no further questions. The next one about the Distributed Energy Services Agreement with Voltus. What kind of background information is there on this one? Or anything additional?
Two quick little things here. We've had this kind of contract for a while. The partner we've got now is really evolving into a different business model, a desired business model, and really is not customer service friendly. I've had some peers tell me the same thing. And I've had connections through my continued interaction on the matters of energy around the nation with other people that do this kind of work and potential partners, kind of across this company here. And they're trying to build a business in the Midwest. It's no big deal. They are basically tapped on by the PJM grid to try to solicit partners to agree to defer load should they call a load reduction. And so they're actually offering us 79% of the share of the PJM offering through the contract period, where NLX, our prior partner, whose contract has expired, only offered us 75%. There is no risk here, so there's no risk at all for us. No, they will not charge us any penalties for underperformance or anything. The good news, even better, is we did some preliminary analysis of what we thought our ability to defer was going to be in this new solar environment. We thought it was going to be like 7/10 of a megawatt. But we were very pleased to find out that one of the last things NLX did for us is they actually did send us last week, end of last week, actual performance data from our test runs at the end of the summer. And we actually performed in the neighborhood of 1.3 megawatts having the solar in place, of course. So that will afford us additional incentive, about double the budget revenue. It probably still won't be the revenue that we've experienced in some of the higher peak years ago, but it will bring in more dollars. Exactly what it is yet to be announced by TJM when they run the reverse auction. But again, there is no risk.
Any questions from the committee or the board?
Yes, I'm not worried about the risk. I'm just curious, though, I mean, just think, yes, what kind of dollars does this actually generate?
Our highest years ago was like $110,000.
Okay.
But our lowest year is probably upon us. It might be like 20,000.
20,000, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So pretty good. Frame of reference.
Yep. Any additional questions? Are there any objections to moving this forward then? Okay, we'll go ahead and move that forward to the board. Next item, the Amendment 6 to the Custodial Services Agreement. Mr. Rankosik again.
Okay, I apologize on this one, point of clarification. This recommendation is to ask the board to recommend, the building committee to consider recommending as attached, but that's, there needs to be more than that. If you look at page 2, there are two options presented. As we looked into how to continue a pace of increase in wages to follow the minimum wage. I know we talked about this once before, but when we took that quickly to try to get back up to economic conditions at the beginning of August, that put us in a different kind of a place with that amendment, and we needed to take another look here. And there are two models presented here, and we actually show you the minimum pay rate for the night custodian in both models. The overall monthly expense includes a lot more things than just that one pay rate. This is the overall rate for the contract, and the percentage increase would be spread across all the workers. I think the night supervisor for a building makes an extra $1 an hour, and there's night supervisors that make a couple more than that. And then there's a couple of management people, day custodians that fill in during the lunch hour, have different qualifications, and their pay rate's a little higher than the lowest rate as well in most cases. So this is just the lowest rate, and then there's a built-in cost for their supply costs, things like that. But if you look at the pace of option 1 here, it's they're at the 13.25 rate that they were at starting July. Yeah, it was July. It went retro. The pace is to start with the next increase on July 1st of the next year, and to go at a 2.5% pace every 6 months to keep ahead of minimum with a little bit extra cushion for keeping us competitive in the market. If you look at option 2, it starts with an increase of a little slower percent pace of 2, and it starts on January 1. With the theory of maybe we could keep their interest if there was little increases on the way. But the reality is that change with that additional step overall in the contract term would give the cause to the district to have a $49,000 increase. So recommendation is to just stick with option 1. I'll be happy to answer any questions, but we'd like the board's read on this and recommendation that take to the board, again, to try to stabilize our costs and clearly identify our costs as we continue to manage under prevailing wage, over prevailing wage, minimum wage, my bad. Yeah, that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah. There's somebody higher than minimum wage working on it. Okay.
Questions from the committee or the board?
Yeah. So, I mean, your experience, you're getting, when they're doing inspections and stuff, your reports, the reporting they're giving you is, I mean, you find useful and sufficient?
Yes, if you're close to what's been going on in the elementary buildings with eating lunch in the classroom, it's tough. It's been tough. We've tried to make some adjustments in the services being provided and not get crazy on expenses. We do at times, we don't do a full a full, deep cleaning and carpet every night of the week. That would be an outrageous increase in expense. We do at times, call-in services on the weekend to go back in and do a deep scrub on Saturday and Sunday and some carpets, but that's the only area where there's been some minor challenges. I don't think it's the fault of the service, it's just the nature of what we're doing on carpet. That's the only concern I've had with their operation. They've actually had their staff up to a point where they are not completely staffed. They are 4 FTE short still. I was with many of my peers at the Midwest Facility Masters Conference for 2 days earlier this week, and I will tell you, we are not alone. In fact, our percentage of vacancy is much lower than some of our peers. Case in point, I think it's, Wheaton Warrenville? They're more than double the vacancy than we are with their contract cleaning service.
And Doug, I apologize, I actually was reading the HVAC contract.
Oh, my bad.
At the Custodial, so that's why I was asking the question.
No problem.
That's why I don't,
That's a different discussion.
I jumped to my, sorry.
So just your recommendation is to go with option 1 on here?
Yes.
Okay. All right, any other questions? Is there any objection with going with option 1 then from the committee and moving that ahead to the board? All right, I hear no objections. We'll go ahead and move that forward as well. The next item, amendment 2 to the HVAC. And we already had that question.
Just remember the question. Answer in that context.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
No problem. Moving ahead.
So, we've had this contract since 2017. It's been good. We've had this contract, I developed this model for purchasing these kinds of services as the district grew to the point where bidding was warranted a number of years ago. And I think we're on our 4th contractor, and these guys have been probably the best performers. They're real partners when it comes to follow-up repairs, and all expenses are reasonable. I think the offer is a pretty good deal because if you may notice, it's a one-time increase. And so for the 3-year period, it's fixed at a pretty good percentage there. And as I talk to the partners, I always remind them the hardest part of a service contract is starting it up, and it gets easier after you get things moving and they understand the customer expectations and all the workers understand the service tasks at hand. And they're taking that to heart, and they don't take any shortcuts. Everything's been fine. We have had, I think the years of this kind of service have proved that we've had less breakdowns than we used to. I really do believe that. We get a lot of compliments on the condition of our HVAC equipment from people that visit on one-off services and energy audits and things. So I'm kind of proud of the care we've been having.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Any objections with moving this forward?
Can I ask you a question on the custodial? Sorry.
No worries. If there's no objection, then we'll go ahead and move that ahead as well. So we'll accept the recommendation. The next one, actually, that's it. I'll turn it over to Mr. Stratty for the Legislative Committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Legislative, only a few things, kind of just a recap from last or 2 weeks ago. HB 594. This extends the sunset date for school districts to utilize interfund transfers to June 30th of 2024. HB 1975 addresses grooming and sexual abuse in schools by providing several resources and training for parents, students, and teachers. HB 2778 would require that schools support personnel be paid when school districts utilize e-learning days. Also provides that teachers retain any sick leave days used because of COVID-19. And then SB 1169 limits the Healthcare Right of Conscious Act to not apply to clients with COVID-19 requirements.
The only thing I was gonna add is the school employee, wage protection bill is not expected to be signed by the governor, but you'll notice the number of votes that it does have is plenty to override that veto. So that will not go into effect. However, it could be something we see surface again in the spring. So something to deal with. It would probably be retroactive if it did, which would be quite a challenge for our HR office. But when we'll tackle if it arises.
All right, any other questions or comments? If not, we'll go to item 10, Board of Education.
Okay, Board of Education. Before I get into the Delegate Assembly stuff, just want to make a comment. Last Thursday, we attended, myself and Dr. Rowe attended the Kishwaukee Division meeting for the ISB, and Paul Troy was elected chair. I'm very proud of Paul. Paul's been very involved with that. I mean, you're at your master board level recognition through there. Been very diligent being involved in that, and we're very proud of you stepping. You were the vice chair, I believe, prior to that. So congratulations to you, and thank you for taking the time to do that on behalf of the district. So it's great.
Thank you.
So 10.1 is we have the Delegate Assembly, the Triple I Conference coming up in a couple weeks. And so as part of that conference, every year except for last year, physically not being there, part of that is this Delegate Assembly that goes through various proposals and resolutions that are brought forward by various school districts. They usually do that, I believe, in August. There's a large group that vets these things out from presenting districts, and then they decide which ones they're going to take up, and then they vote on it. So that we have at our place, we were given last week, the listings of the various items. So tonight, we're charged with more or less going through these proposals, resolutions, and coming up, just discussing our opinions, our thoughts on it, and ultimately what we'll do is we'll vote next Thursday, come up with our district, how our district will be responding on these at the Delegate Assembly. So I think the way I want to do this because some of these things can be a little comprehensive, is, the way these are presented is the district's presenting them, their rationale, the Resolutions Committee has a rationale, and then they decide whether they're going to recommend to adopt it or not adopt it. So what I'd like to do, so this doesn't take forever, I mean, I want to give everything its fair due, but I would like to focus on resolutions that you feel you do not agree with the Resolution Committee's recommendation. Is how I'd like to go. So, I mean, we'll go through these one, it doesn't have to be limited to that, but I'd like to start with that as the premise for having significant discussions on it. So I'll go over each main topic. I'll state what the Resolutions Committee recommendation is, and then see if anybody feels differently about it, and if they'd like to state why they feel differently about it. We can discuss, debate, whatever on those items. So the first item is Board Employee Relations, and it's the pre-service teacher education and licensure in literacy. And the Resolutions Committee recommends to adopt, the school district is proposing to require certain licensure and I believe in reading. Literacy, undergraduate level literacy being needed to teach on these items. Okay, so does anybody not agree or disagree with the recommendation to adopt it. Okay, it was easy. Move to the next one. Next one is Student Safety and Protection Plan. And this one was before us previously several times, and it's failed several times at the conference. But I think it's one of the ones that gets debated quite heavily, if I'm recalling this correctly, right, Paul? You've been there for that.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting process. Yes, it does get considerable debate. In my opinion, I think once people have had enough of listening to the same people or the same points of view repeatedly, they call it to question, and then any of the long lines of people that still want to speak to it are now sitting down because they've essentially brought the discussion to an end. So I think the last time we attended this 2 years ago, that call to question came up very quickly as opposed to 3 years ago when it actually was a very lengthy and spirited debate. What I also find interesting overall about these discussions is whether or not delegates can change the vote based on what their boards say. And I've asked a couple other delegates, it's kind of tangential, but some boards do allow their delegates to change the vote based on how that discussion goes, where other boards do not allow that because they vote as a group.
Right.
And that delegate is supposed to carry that voice going forward, right?
Yeah.
So it's been interesting from my perspective as a past delegate to hear that perspective from different board members on whether they change their vote on the spot based on that discussion or not. As I mentioned, this particular topic has gained a very wide and spirited debate on both sides of the topic. So I would expect that will happen again this time.
Right. So the gist of it again is it would allow it's a student safety and protection plan which would allow voluntary district employees in any capacity the ability to carry a concealed firearm on district property, provided the employee has a valid FOIA card, et cetera, all this different training and stuff. So, and again, we've discussed it in the sense of, speak for how we've discussed it before. I think we, as a district ourselves, this isn't a resolution that compels any school district to do anything. It's just the opposite. It's meant to cater to districts that are not in, don't have access to emergency services and stuff, rural districts that would allow themselves to take care of matters because they don't have student resource officers, et cetera, available to them. So the resolution, I cannot remember how the resolutions committee has gone with this before, but their recommendation is do adopt, meaning give the school districts the flexibility to possibly have that in place. So does anybody have any opinion that's contrary to that?
So I've been against it in the past, and I'll stay against it for this one as well.
Yeah, I think overall I was against it, and probably that's where I'm still leaning, but their argument was actually a good one.
Yeah, I agree.
So in my little score tally, it's one of my plus minus ones.
Right.
There's a dichotomy of answers on every other one except for two of them, and this is one of those two where, you know, the thing that I would point out is that the district that is suggesting this is they quote their district as 378 square miles in area.
Right.
And they're talking a lot of rural
coverage.
Right. And if you can think of trying to find police officers, trying to hire resource officers, that type of thing, it's a different world than what we live in. And I'm sensitive to that, but I just can't quite get there. I'm close, but I'm not quite there.
Yeah, I in the past, I've never, I don't believe, been there, but they do make a compelling case, in my opinion. Again, they want, it's a 3-town school district. One of the towns doesn't have a police force. I'm not a huge gun guy by any stretch of the imagination, but I actually have come around on this, and I personally, I'm okay with the do-adopt, because I don't, you know, it's nothing I'm interested in our school district. I'm looking at it from the stance of somebody who's in that rural situation, who would be in a much different situation than us, where it would at least afford them that flexibility. So.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tony. I think what's different this time around, which we haven't seen in the past, is this district goes more into detail about their actual struggles about it. And, you know, sometimes when we're looking at these things, we know that we probably don't need something like this here in the district, because we have, our police departments are, what's the call time, 2 minutes, not even, away to every one of our campuses. But you have to think about it as a statewide issue, and this gives local control to those school districts who don't have the same response time from their public safety as we do, to be able to protect their students. And so I think it's not a matter of, you know, do you believe in guns or not? It's a matter of, how are you going to keep your students in your community safe? And I think that also the fact that they say right here that they have a hard time hiring and keeping resource officers, that's a real concern. I can't imagine if we didn't have those in our schools, if there were a tragedy, what would happen. So I'm for adopting this for those reasons, knowing that most likely we don't have that need here in our district, but other districts do.
Anybody else want to speak to the matter?
I'll just say I agree as well.
Okay.
I think you have a very strong argument. Their rationale is logical. And I see nothing wrong with supporting them, recognizing and calling out their need for this type of support, especially, like Leslie said, with them talking about their SROs and retaining.
All right. Okay. No one else wants to speak further on that matter? That's fine. We'll move on to the item 3 is board operations and duties. I think somebody comes up with this every year. School board member compensation. The resolutions committee recommends do not adopt. I obviously concur with that.
I
do.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody disagrees with that.
I firmly oppose anything that does not include a car allowance.
Yeah, there's not enough, right?
That's right, that's right.
No, that's fine.
Yeah,
So wait, so
So this would be,
here's,
yeah,
it says recommend do not.
not adopt.
So then am I supporting the recommendation?
Yes.
Yes, you're
Okay.
supporting the recommendation.
And just for clarity, I agree with that. Do not adopt.
I understood you. Some others might not.
We go through this every year.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, but yes, clarify. Okay. The next one's a little trickier. Allison, appreciate you clarifying. Okay, so it's board member, item 4 is board member childcare reimbursement. Okay, so that gets a little more trickier here. Resolutions committee recommends do adopt. Okay, so that's a little, I are talking about a little helping out school board members. The rationale is they want to eliminate barriers to people who are interested in being on a school board and running, where they might have that as a barrier to them being able to serve. And so that's the rationale that's being put out there for this, as opposed to regular compensation. So does anybody feel strongly one way or the other on this thing?
I oppose this, because I looked at this as a form of compensation.
Yeah.
And it is a little bit more specific in nature, but it's still considered compensation. And so staying consistent with the compensation argument, that's why I'm opposed to the recommendation.
I agree with you 100%. Anybody else have any thoughts?
It doesn't look like there's any parameters as to what the cost of child
And
care
that's
would
why,
be.
and see, that's the whole problem with it, because it just gets into, you start getting into, okay, what's the limitations on it, what's the, this,
Reasonable and customary.
is there other types of costs you should be getting reimbursed for? I just, it opens up,
Mhm.
an area where that I personally don't want to
Well,
see that go.
and not to mention, I mean, we have our regularly scheduled school board meetings, but we also have, we had an event last night, and we have, many other outside of our school board, activities and responsibilities, and so I feel like that's kind of a slippery slope that we'd be going down.
Yeah.
Child care for triple-I.
Yeah, all right, I mean, I don't know where it would end from that standpoint. So
Right.
you guys are all, nothing further to elaborate on, you guys are all,
Do not
yeah, we would not be
So,
in favor of adopting, we would,
hold.
yeah, we'd oppose the recommendation. Item 5 is, remote virtual school board open meetings. Submitted by U46. And its recommendation is do adopt. It's pretty much what we did during COVID. I mean, I don't personally have a problem with it. It served a purpose at the time. I mean, it probably could serve a purpose going forward.
Well, and I agree with it as well, and I think one thing I would highlight too is things around, work commitments and those type of things where you have evenings you're more than willing to sit.
Right.
And, take in a meeting, participate, but you might not be able to physically
You
do
might be
that.
out of town.
And I don't think that should,
Prohibit.
DQ anything about a meeting, so
Right,
support it even more for that reason.
right, okay. Anybody else want to comment on this one? All right, so we'll support that. Item 6 is district organization and election. So 6 is reorganized boards. The current law is 28 days. This district is proposing to extend it to 40 days. Committee's recommendation is do adopt. I think it's just meant to give districts more time to get their stuff together. Again, you run into, I think the point was, you might get stuck having to call a special meeting, which we've had to do the last 2 elections. So and their point is, we're already doing X amount of meetings, do you want to keep adding on to the meetings type of thing. So,
Although it wouldn't be so bad if they had, like childcare or compensation for that extra
Right.
meeting.
Exactly.
In joking aside, so this is one where I was on the border, because what I concern myself with is timing. In our instance, our board meetings come towards the end of that 28-day cycle, but there are boards that meet at the early part of that cycle, and there's a mention in this about lame duck voting. And having 40 days, if your timing of the election versus the timing of your board meetings is just right, you can actually have 2 meetings or more where you do have a lame duck board that's sitting there making decisions and discussions.
And remember, it's not a requirement, it's just you get up to 40 days
Yeah.
to seat in the board. So a district can effectuate that in a shorter period of time. If they've got important votes like that and they want to have a meeting, they can do it. I mean, as I read this, I think it's just, you have up to 40 days on it. So it just, to me, it's more about giving flexibility, and yes, you could run into that, but you can also work around that. I mean, the district could get it taken care of. So it's I don't know, I'm not overly passionate on it personally, but I think it probably makes it a little more of a common sense, just give a little bit more time to get things situated to be able to do it through the course of regular meeting.
I mean, to me, that first struck me as just having being able to have your normal meetings in the normal flow, being able to accommodate to the new board. But Paul, your point's an interesting one, because I think it could be abused, and it could be abused in a way that, would not always be avoidable. But, like I said, I hadn't really thought of it yet, so I don't quite know where I land on it.
And the other part of this that I was trying to think of is how does this work in a conventional government entity? Because this is extending it specifically for school board meetings.
They usually take more time.
And that's what I didn't remember.
I think it's through general election.
Is it? Okay, because I put that in my notes because I didn't.
Thing, but you look at Congress, stuff like, of the Illinois, seating of the Illinois
That time they
Senate.
canvass it, and,
Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, I mean, this one,
Canvassing-
actually, I'm
canvassing
thinking
is
this is one of the
21 days,
shorter
Mhm.
time
Windows.
spans of getting this done, so that's why I'm like, probably okay.
That's, I knew Leslie would know the answer to that, but that's why I put it in my
I remember
notes.
what happened this last April with the mishap in McHenry County and how long it took to actually canvass the vote.
Mm-hmm.
Our window of receiving the canvas and then having to have our meeting was this big.
Yeah.
You know, but I, like Mr. Gentry said, your point was not what I thought of, and it's again, statewide, decision-making for something that could be a local issue.
Mm-hmm.
But on the statewide, I think it benefits us personally, just in terms of flexibility. We always like as much as we can have, but your lame duck issue is valid.
Because I also took a look at, now from the IASB or from the region perspective, what they tabulate is when boards have their meetings, beginning of the month, middle of the month, what day of the week it is, so that they can find an opening that works for all of the boards in our region to have a regional board meeting. And we're one of the few that have a board meeting as late as we do and on Thursday nights. So that's why I started to dig into some of the details, and I'm not trying to just, discount what's being recommended, just, looking at it in a broader scope. So if everybody is compelled to the 40 days or if this is what is fine, I'm totally fine with it either. It's just trying to expand my field of view on this entire thing.
No, it is all valid points. Valid points. I would still support this. So where's everybody? Anybody in opposition of supporting this, or is everybody still okay with supporting it?
Support it.
Support, and Paul, you're half support.
I'm a half supporter.
You're half support. Okay. On to educational programs, item 7, Indigenous people curriculum inclusion. Okay, this is a short thing, so it says, be it resolved, Illinois Association of School Boards shall support legislation to include the study of Native American Indigenous people for social studies content in U.S. history. Resolutions Committee recommends do adopt. So, we have so many things that get legislated about what's got to be taught. I cannot believe this isn't already in there, right? For all the things that they've got in there. So this is, again, this is one of these things where, I'm not big on them legislating everything under the sun. Don't like it, but the problem is they've already got everything but the sun in there. And so what are you going to do? Exclude something like this? Is probably a cleanup to include them. Yeah,
Native American.
yeah, I personally never had a U.S. history class where this wasn't taught already, but.
I can tell you this isn't going to impact us and what's being taught in our classroom,
Right.
so
It's already,
we are harm in
supporting it, right?
Well, I think this is one of those things too, in particular with the comparison to everything else that's mandated, but I think it's just the right thing to have, and there's, if there's any, in my mind, I couldn't think of a good faith way to oppose it, so.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Is everybody on board with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so good there. Item 8, this one's kind of pretty nice. This one's Science of Reading Curriculum. And this is Waukegan School District, and they're extremely specific about the what they want the state of Illinois to require. They want the state of Illinois to adopt in legislation that all elementary schools in Illinois will use the science of reading in their K through 5 grade levels curriculum, including in-depth phonemic education to teach every student proficient reading skills that include reading comprehension, fluency, and vocabulary acquisition. So, I mean, it's a very specific,
And I think it's worth noting that our elementary principals are paying very close attention to this conversation.
okay.
Because this is
Tell me-
something,
so
this is
tell me what
something
you
we
think.
use in this district.
Is it?
Give me more information, please.
Yeah, because I mean, we would have no, so give us, I mean, the committee is recommending do not adopt because I think it's saying.
So I think their rationale for the do not adopt is what to focus on, not the
You're right, the
value of what
program
the
is-
science of reading can bring.
Right.
Because the science of reading is, I mean, it's gonna be best practice. It's what everyone
It's what
should
we're
be
already
doing.
doing.
But the impact of this type of legislation
Is not
could
good.
put districts in a precarious situation about.
Changing what they have, right, changing what they're doing. That's the part I'm sensitive to. I'm not, like.
Not so different than forcing the instruction of Native Americans and Indigenous people. However, your elementary reading curriculum is broad and impacts literally everything you do at the elementary level.
Yeah.
But again, I'll say it's best practice.
Well, but it says also that it's, you know, the resolution being presented is more restrictive.
Yeah, restrictive
changes
meaning
the
that
curriculum.
this is all you can teach.
Right, and it makes changes, yeah, to teacher preparation, that's just,
So the science of reading, I can help support that, but we presented that in our, and if you remember back in August, our learning plan, we're shifting that mindset within our literacy instruction. We teach kids to learn, we teach to think, and together, when we focus on both, we create lifelong readers. I think the piece, when I was reading into this one a little bit, when I saw it come across, is that it is expensive to provide professional learning to staff for this. And so that course that they're taking, we are right now doing that through our institute days. All of our elementary admin and instructional coaches, many of them are certified trainers, and we've been moving down that path for a couple of years. So to us, we've been planning for it, and we're shifting that way and providing our resources with that mindset. I think the reason there's some questions is just that it is a monetary, I mean, it's expensive to provide professional learning, and for districts that might have been completely on the opposite end of that spectrum of how you teach kids to read, it's a heavy lift.
Big
You
lift,
don't have those funding. So with that said, it is the best, I mean, right now it's best practices, but we're moving that way. Our staff loved their training, I think, over all of the lessons today, and so, we're happy about it, but, I can see why there could be a question.
Right, so how about if I'll state it, we're firmly behind the science of reading. But we don't feel that it should be committed to legislation that requires every single school district to have to adopt it, which is what the resolutions committee is saying by recommend do not adopt. So in essence, I would agree with them not adopting the resolution for that purpose, even though it is what we use and are extremely happy with utilizing. So does anybody feel any different than that?
Are they asking that legislation allocate funding for the teachers to?
No, I don't think they have anything there. They're just saying, this is best practice. It should be the way we teach reading in all our schools. But they're not statewide, but they're not going as far as saying, yeah, so it would be an unfunded mandate for certain districts who don't have this, who would be required to adopt it.
Am I not reading? First policy makers and legislators to allocate funding for teacher professional development.
For development, yeah.
Okay.
But you're still adopting a very specific curriculum and saying there
Saying this is,
are
there's
no
only
other.
one way, yeah, this is one, there's one way or the highway.
Yep.
This is it.
Got it.
So this is jamming something down every school district's throat. And I don't think that's what we feel is the right way to go about business. So we would be, saying yes. We support the recommendation to not adopt. Okay. But again, qualifying, we are supportive of science of reading. So on to 9, health and sex education curriculum. And I'll read it because it's a short. A speech shall support and advocate for local school district control of content and curriculum for health sex education courses offered in their districts. The Resolutions Committee recommends do adapt. And so this is a big local control type of question or resolution being put forth. And obviously, the ISB is very supportive of local control on issues. I think what they're saying here is we don't want a one-size-fits-all curriculum in this if certain communities feel a little bit differently here. So,
If you may remember, Senate Bill 818 was one of considerable discussion in our board and across the state. So, like you said, local control against versus teaching the national standards which is what that bill is forcing or mandating.
right. Right. All right. So, is there anybody who is not supportive of the Resolutions Committee recommendation to adopt? Okay. So we would be saying yes to that. Item 10, financing public education, cannabis sales. So they're looking to allocate specifically 20% of the state tax revenues from cannabis sales to public education programs that support youth development, violence prevention, and health education. What they're looking to do, Resolutions Committee recommends do adapt. I have a question mark here, which is a little, feeling a little uneasy on this one. So, I don't know what.
I guess I have just a fundamental skepticism about something like this.
Really?
It,
Lottery? Can you say lottery?
You stole my example. But all dollars are fungible at the budget level, especially in the long term, meaning if you have this money designated to go to education, it's just gonna be a way to say, hey, they got that money, so we can cut back on others. And in the end, it's all a pot of money ultimately. So 20% of cannabis does not mean any increase in education spending long term. So kind of why bother with the designation? Because I don't think in the long term it will make a difference.
You and me are really on the same page here. It's just exactly, like, why bother? That was my question mark, is why is this here? I mean, why bother?
Yeah, I agree. I don't trust that the state of Illinois is gonna, if we put this in place 20%, I don't have a lot of faith that they're gonna carry it through. Also concerned that it might affect our evidence-based funding at some point too. And fundamentally, I kind of struggle with this to begin with.
Do you want to be associated with generating revenue from cannabis sales?
Some of the cannabis sales goes into general revenue fund anyways for
right,
education.
right.
But to designate it, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know, it just
Seems kind of
seems icky and
yeah, it's like you said, unless it's lockbox, which it won't be. I don't trust that this money's not going to get swept. I think I'm cynical, but
skeptical.
Yeah.
You're cynical.
Jaded.
I agree.
So does anybody feel, so it sounds like we're mostly opposed to this recommendation of do adapt. Does anybody feel differently than that?
Kind of wishy-washy.
Wishy-washy.
Yeah.
You're opposing funds. Yeah, I know, it's, yeah, I know, but it's kind of, I don't know if I got the right term for it, but I don't feel like it's real funding, to be honest with you.
Maybe the only hand in the room.
Yeah.
That's where I looked at the other, one of the ones that's much further down, I think it's 17, which had to deal with the Constitution Amendment on educational funding. That to me carries a little bit more teeth and some weight to it, whereas this one is, it's just, like you said, a pool of dollars, and in the end, it's how they allocate the pool of dollars. And if you're gonna go for this, you might as well just shoot for 50% and then start ratcheting it down year by year to see where the
Don't we get it all?
spot is.
Yeah, don't we get it all?
Yeah.
So,
But I think if you did have Because I'm kind of hearing the counter argument here, but if you did have $1 billion more in cannabis revenue, that does allow you to prioritize and hit your targets for evidence-based funding anyway.
Right.
So it's like, it's just a matter of, can the state overall maintain that discipline when there's a greater inflow of money? And they should be able to. So it's, theoretically, you're getting to the same point in a better way by not doing this.
Right. Yeah, I just assume them, whatever money they are generating for their overall good, just, they do the right thing and allocate sufficient funds to education. It's their fundamental duty, regardless of whether you have something like this in there or not.
Wasn't the tollway set up to?
Pay for itself, and the booth would be down.
And then the booth would come down?
That was Kevin's
Wasn't the
other one.
lottery set up to pay for education, and that's, you
That
know.
was Kevin's other one after lottery. Number 2 on his family.
I don't have a
feud
lot
list.
of faith in that.
All right, Melissa, you did sound like you had some thoughts on it.
I mean, now I'm hearing love, Leslie's bringing up valid points about trusting where that money goes. So at first reading it, I was like, well, it's
Money's money.
money's money, and cannabis sales are up there. And why not have this extra money for some of these programs? But if we can't rely on it, and we have that gut feeling that we can't trust that it's going to be used for these purposes, and that it could have that negative effect on us, all of a sudden I start going, maybe not.
Yeah, because it's not like this is saying, here, raise whatever rate by 20% to generate this. That's not what's going on here. They're just saying out of the existing funds that are coming from cannabis sales, earmark 20% of it towards this.
Got it.
Is
And
what
that's
they're
what I
doing.
just
So
The
that's
key
the
word
part.
is earmarked, though.
Yeah, right,
It's not
exactly. Yeah.
required or, you know, so they can.
So that's why I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm opposing additional funding, because it's just how you're mixing and matching here, and it doesn't really hold a ton of water type of thing. So that's what I'm saying. To me, it's not worth going down that specific road. There's other roads that are better served to possibly address that. So
Do we know what percentage is coming in now?
a lot.
Supposedly.
I don't know the exact percentage. It's a big percentage. It's the state gets, that's why you think they have this stuff got legalized, and it's a large pot of money, literally. Sorry. Unintentional.
Working on that one.
Unintentional fun.
And so is what percentage of it is coming to schools?
Kevin's writing this.
I don't know.
Nothing is specifically
Nothing
earmarked.
specifically says that.
What they should have done is they should have probably tagged and forced the marijuana sales to go to buckets that they're, to pay off the debt. It would have been a wise thing to do, but that's not what we do.
Yeah, it's not how our state operates.
Yeah. So I misread that, so now
That's all
I'm
right.
changing.
Okay, so we're gonna oppose that recommendation.
I believe our Senator DeWitt proposed a bill forcing their hand to do just that, and it just didn't gain traction.
And Wayne Carter. Okay, on to item 11.
These discussions are good.
Clean energy infrastructure federal funding. It's be it resolved, we shall urge the Congress of the United States to provide federal funding to school districts for clean energy infrastructure, including but not limited to solar panels, geothermal heating and cooling, and wind turbines. We already been into that punch there. Resolution committee is recommending to not adopt. Out of curiosity, Mr. Altmeyer, the funds are all state, but do they come from the federal government that we get?
Answer?
Yeah.
No.
No. For the solar project.
The solar project.
Solar project, money that
The
No, that's
money
all
that,
state of Illinois.
the grant funding that went to Forefront.
The answer?
No.
that's right, to come from the state.
For the pool.
But are they funded through the federal government, or they come through the state? Why don't you jump on that?
Oh, it's on. So the renewable energy credits, the Rex credits.
Right.
Are money that, a pool that ComEd collects from charges on everyone's utility bill. There's an RPS charge, that's Renewable Portfolio Standards, been collected.
Right, so we
Being collected for
for
over
all
a
that
decade.
day. That's just coming through the state, none of it's federal funded.
Because the Rex charges are, if anything, they're regional, because it depends where that power company is. ComEd is not, doesn't provide electricity nationally, right? There's other power companies throughout. There's Chesapeake Bay Power, I'm sure there's somebody in Northeast. There's all sorts of power companies that are out there. So it's gotta be at a state level, state by state level. I found it humorous, actually, unfortunately, and the Champaign, district was quite active in their proposals this year. But for a school board entity on a state level to advocate on a federal level, it just seems like an overreach of, I'm not sure anybody would, how much listening there would be done.
Okay, well, that's kind of where the committee, resolution committee was, so does anybody, they say do not adopt, does anybody have a position that's contrary to that? All right, so we would be following their recommendation. 12, these guys are all a step behind us here, so 12 is electric school buses, charging stations, federal funding. Again, it's gonna be the same deal, Champaign, and it's basically saying, hey, let's get some money from the federal government on it, and the resolutions committee is doing the same thing, recommends do not adopt. Does anybody feel, contrary to this position? All right, so we would be following that position. Item 13 is landscaping federal funding. Champaign, just all over that federal government. It's another one of their resolutions. We're talking about landscaping and infrastructure improvements to mitigate the effects of environmental problems. Okay, this one, the resolutions committee did recommend to adopt.
Yeah, I'm confused.
I'm confused too, but it's okay. So why?
To me, it seems like the same logic you apply to 12 and 13,
Right,
15,
exactly.
and 14. And
Exactly.
I'm sorry, 11 and 12 logic should be applied to 13.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be against,
Right.
I'd be against it for the same reason.
Same.
Yeah, so we would be, we would be opposing this, following the recommendation unless somebody feels we should be following this.
And not like what they're saying in this one is really a bad thing.
No,
I mean,
none of it.
to address, but there's just so many other avenues to address it in that already exist.
Yeah, and why is it the federal government's issue that you want to deal with landscaping, for your environment? So, all right, so we'll oppose that one, being consistent with the prior two. So on to, legislative activities, and it would be, expand broadband internet access. And this would be, ISB shall actively present to the board and advocate for legislation that expands broadband internet access for families across the state of Illinois. And this is a recommendation to adopt. I would think that would be something we could be supportive of, right?
Yes.
Yep, I don't think we have anybody who would disagree with that, so we would be supporting that. Item 15 is, okay, child safe gun storage. All right. Not exactly sure, sir. We get into this, but, I don't know how this, so read, shall support and advocate for legislation which strengthens child safe gun storage laws in the state of Illinois, requiring gun owners to store firearms, whether they are loaded or unloaded, in a securely locked container. A person under the age of 18 is likely to gain access to the weapon without permission. The Resolution Committee recommends do not adopt, and I believe the rationale is because, they're in the way into the beyond school district territory type stuff, right? So that's, So does anybody feel differently that, like, this is something that the school board, the district should be advocating legislatively for?
No, the last sentence for me in the resolutions committee rationale would spoke volumes.
Yeah. And you're talking about ultimately felt the resolution went too far and that it was not the place of the local school board or ISB to determine the actions people take in their own homes. Right?
That was it.
That's what resonates. All right. So everybody follow along with that? Everybody's good with recommending,
I do,
okay.
but I also appreciate, the concern of the school district, and they do bring to light or just continue to, highlight, some statistics, and I think that their mindset in terms of keeping students safe is there, especially when they talk about, school shooters being current or former students that are familiar with active shooter protocols. And I understand what we're saying. I appreciate what they're trying to do.
Yeah, no,
thinking forward about
it's
student safety and how can they prevent someone from taking a gun from their home. So if we, have these safety measures in place, then it's just an additional padded step to possibly preventing a tragedy. But I also understand, it's just.
Yeah, I mean, right, it's, right, it's beyond our scope, let's say. It is absolutely a noble, thought, and you would hope that, this is occurring, in households, and that hopefully this doesn't, but it's not in our, shouldn't be really part of our realm as far as, advocating it through our ASB on this, so. We'll follow the recommendation of do not adopt. Gets me to the last of the new positions, which is 16, the school code review. Champagne again, man. So they're looking, complete an in-depth review of the school code, make recommendations for systemic education change to the General Assembly. Task force shall be representative of student demographics and needs, specifically including race, socioeconomic status, special education, and English language learners. The goal shall be to provide recommendations to change sections of the Illinois school code that disproportionately harm students of protected classes while unfairly benefiting advantaged students. So, Resolutions Committee was recommended do not adopt. The rationale was concerned that the submitting district's proposed resolution was not focused enough to be achievable. While the committee voiced concern over the fact that the school code continues to grow year after year, they believe the task of school code review was too broad, without more clear direction and a more narrow focus. The committee was not in favor of the resolution. So did anything that Champagne presented, did any of them get recommended?
I got a couple of them.
I don't think they were, any of them were recommended to adopt, though. I think they're all recommended to not adopt.
Broadband internet.
Broadband internet? Okay, I got one. So does anybody, not agree with the resolution committee on this one? And we'll support that one, as best I see. Okay. So we have a few other types of positions. The next is the amended existing positions. So 17 is the position statement 2 constitutional amendment on school funding. I'll read this one. SB shall support passage of an amendment to the Illinois Constitution that would make education a fundamental right, would make it a paramount duty for the state to provide a thorough and efficient system of public education. These are the changes that equitably serves students and provides an equitable education to all students within the state of Illinois without regard to their race, social and economic status, gender expression, sexual orientation, nationality, immigration status, disability, or zip code. That would prevent, this part didn't change, and that would provide that the state has the preponderant financial responsibility for financing the system of public education. Resolutions Committee recommends do adopt. Does anybody not agree with that? Okay, we would be supporting that. We'll move on to,
Well, just an editorial comment on that, when you talk about zip code, I mean, I think it's fine as a value statement, but I don't think the way it's,
worded.
no, the way we're structured, I'm not sure you could ever get there, because you would have to funnel a lot of the responsibility back to the state and away from local districts, and it, you know, as a practical matter, might be a bridge too far in the next, say, 50 to 100 years. But that all aside, I think it's a more than a noble and good statement to stand behind. Not to sound cynical.
That sounds okay. All right, so lastly, we're on reaffirmation of existing positions. There's 6 of these. I'll try to get to them quick. Resolution Statement 1.16, Charter School Renewal of Charters. Resolutions Committee recommends do adopt. Anybody in disagreement with that? Okay, so we would support that. Item 19 is the position statement, 1.17, Charter School at-risk students. The Resolution Committee, again, recommends do adopt. Anybody in opposition to that? No, so we would support that. Item 20 is position statement 2.25, statement authorized charter school funding. Resolutions Committee recommends do adopt. Anybody in disagreement with that?
I'm not opposed to it. I just find it interesting that there are 2 types of charter schools that are out there. One, most of them are, as these position statements talk about, state authorized, and there are some that are locally authorized. And so these position statements focus on the state authorized ones, yeah.
No, it's a good point. Okay, last of the reaffirming is 21 is position statement 2.04, funding special education programs. Again, this is a Resolution Committee recommends do adopt. I won't get into large detail here. Is everybody on board with that? Okay.
Yep.
So we would support that. I lied. So there's 2 more. They're new belief statements. I thought they were all, one new belief statement. 22, prepare all students to succeed. I'll read it. It's not long. SB believes that school districts should prepare all students to succeed and cultivate learning. To that end, ISB urges school districts to consider adopting a policy encouraging students to complete assignments within a reasonable time frame, even after the due date, by developing guidelines on how to grade a student's late assignments. Okay, and the Resolutions Committee recommends do adopt. Is everybody on board with that?
Yes.
Okay, we would be supportive of that. Now we're on to the last one, and this is an amended.
Just a question on that one, though, is it needed? I mean, I guess I fundamentally don't have an issue with the concept, but it's like, how do you handle,
How you do legislating?
like, the rationale goes into like no zeros, which is fine, you can make an argument for that, but the resolution itself,
Yeah, remember,
it
this is a belief statement.
yeah.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Take more interest over the board.
No, I know. So I'm going, okay, this is, I'm not looking to legislate it, but they're just stating this is our belief statement, which, okay. All right. then we have an amended belief statement, and this, I promise you, is the last item. And that is physical and mental health of students. I'll read it, be it resolved that the ISB believes that the overall physical and mental health of our students is of prime importance. Local boards of education and school districts officials should have the authority and flexibility to access state and community health services as deemed appropriate. To that end, ISB urges school districts to comply with the required notification provisions regarding vision screening for students, recommends that parents provide regular and ongoing comprehensive vision, dental, and physical examinations for their children, and encourages school districts to consider adopting a policy requiring optometric vision examinations for all children entering kindergarten. Resolutions Committee recommends to adopt. Anybody in opposition of that?
Don't we already have that? Isn't that already?
It was already there. This is an amended belief statement, and there's two line items that the physical and mental was the change.
Okay.
And dental and physical was the change in the bottom part. So there was only a couple word changes to this amended belief statement. So yes, it did already exist. This is an enhanced version of the belief statement.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right, so everybody on board? All right. That concludes the Resolutions Committee report and our scrutiny of it. So we will be voting on, we'll tally what we have, what we support, what we oppose. We'll tally that at our board meeting, and then we'll determine our representative, and we'll go to Delegate Assembly with that. So moving on, item 10.2 is our minutes. Minutes in our packet. Does anybody have any questions about that, or are we good with moving that forward to the board meeting for approval? It's fine. Item 11, closed session. I'd like to make a motion to go into closed session at 8:03 for the items enumerated in the agenda. Can I have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Maiorino. Can we have roll call?
Mr. Troy?
Yes.
Mr. Guerin?
Yes.
Mr. Gentry?
Yes.
Mr. Fabiano?
Yes.
Mrs. Melendi?
Yes.
Mrs. Maiorino?
Yes.
Mr. Frady?
Yes.
Okay, we'll be in closed session.
Don't. Just kidding.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're back from, closed session, 8:54. Can we have roll call?
Mr. Craddy?
Here.
Mr. Garrett?
Here.
Mrs. Melendi?
Present.
Mr. Gentry?
Here.
Mr. Quagliano?
Here.
Mrs. Myarino?
Here.
Mr. Troy?
Here?
All right, keeping up present and here. All right, I'll make a motion at 8:55 to adjourn the whole meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Ms. Melendi. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned.